was already on the phone with my bank when I walked through the door. I wasn't supposed to be home. He knew that. I'd told him the week before that I had a work trip to Ottawa. 3 days, maybe 4. But the conference ended a day early, and I drove back through the sleet on the 401, thinking about nothing except a hot shower and my own bed. I didn't call ahead. I didn't text. I just came home. And there he was, my brother, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, my filing cabinet drawer hanging out, and my phone pressed to his ear. He looked up when I walked in, and I will never forget his face in that moment. Not the guilt, not the panic, but the half-second where he actually looked annoyed that I was there. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone and hung up. I asked him what he was doing. He said he was just checking on the place. I looked at the filing cabinet. I looked at my laptop. I looked at the yellow notepad on the table where he'd written down my policy number, my life insurance policy number, the one I kept in the back of a folder I hadn't touched in 2 years. I asked him again, very quietly, "What are you doing?" He said I was overreacting. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is Grant. Growing up, he was the one who got the grades, got the scholarships, got the job offers. I was the one who had to fight for everything. The second kid, the girl, the one who had to prove herself twice over to get half the credit. That's not bitterness talking. That's just how it was in our family. My parents loved us both, I believe that, but Grant moved through the world like it owed him something, and for a long time it delivered. Then it stopped delivering. He got divorced 4 years ago, lost the house in the settlement, a beautiful place in Oakville he'd spent a decade paying into. His ex-wife got primary custody of their son, and the child support payments were steep. He'd been leasing a car he couldn't afford, running up a line of credit he never talked about, and somewhere in the middle of all that he'd developed a habit at the casino in Niagara Falls that he liked to call just blowing off steam. I knew some of this. Not all of it. He kept the worst parts hidden the way people do when they're ashamed, by only letting you see enough to feel sorry for them, not enough to see the full picture. I had been feeling sorry for him for years. I'm a nurse. I work at a hospital in Hamilton, and I've been there for 9 years. I don't make a fortune, but I'm careful with money. I own my condo. I have a decent RRSP, some GICs, and a life insurance policy my dad pushed me to get when I was 26. I don't have a partner. No kids. My emergency fund is real, and it took me a long time to build. Grant knew all of this because I trusted him, because he was my brother. Because when our parents got older, I assumed we'd be the team that held things together. I was wrong about a lot of things. After I caught him at my kitchen table, I didn't scream at him. I didn't cry. I just stood there while he gave me the version of events he'd obviously prepared on the drive over. That he was worried about me. That he was just looking for the contact number for my building manager. That he'd accidentally knocked a filing cabinet open while looking for a pen. It was so thin. It was embarrassing how thin it was. But I nodded. I told him it was fine. I asked if he wanted tea. He looked relieved. That was the tell. If I'd actually been overreacting, he would have been annoyed. But he was relieved. Which meant he'd been afraid, and the only reason to be afraid was because he'd actually been doing something worth getting caught for. I made the tea. We talked about nothing for 20 minutes. He left. And then I sat down at my kitchen table and I went very still, the way I go still sometimes at work when something bad has happened, and I need to think clearly before I act. I went through the filing cabinet. The folder for my life insurance policy had been opened. I could tell. I keep things in a specific order, and 2 documents were slightly out of place. The policy number was written on his notepad, which he'd taken with him but left an impression on the next sheet. I pressed a pencil lightly over it the way I'd seen done in movies, half expecting it not to work. It worked. Policy number, the name of my insurer, and the words "beneficiary change" written and then scratched out. He hadn't gotten that far, but he'd been looking into it. I didn't sleep that night. I need to explain something about my financial situation because it matters. When my grandmother passed 3 years ago, she left me her house in Burlington. Not Grant, just me. She and I had been close in a way she and Grant never were. She used to say Grant reminded her of men she'd known who spent their whole lives waiting to be rescued. She left him some money from her estate, a fair amount, and she left me the house. I sold it 18 months after she died and put the money into a mix of registered and non-registered accounts. After tax, after fees, I had just over $240,000 sitting across several accounts, plus my existing savings, not wealthy, but comfortable, safe, the kind of safe that takes a lifetime to build and one disaster to destroy. Grant knew about the inheritance. He'd been at the reading of the will. He'd smiled and hugged me and said, Gran always had a soft spot for me. What I didn't find out until later, much later, was that around the same time Gran's estate was being settled, Grant had borrowed $60,000 from someone who was not a bank. Not even close to a bank. Someone he'd met through the casino. Someone who charged interest the way normal people charge feelings, constantly, exponentially, without mercy. He needed money. He needed a lot of it, and I was the only person in his life who had any. The week after I found the notepad, I called my financial advisor. Her name is Preethi, and she's been handling my accounts for 4 years, and she does not mess around. I told her I needed a few things changed immediately. I wanted to update my beneficiaries on all registered accounts. I wanted to add a note to my file that any changes to my accounts required a phone call confirmation directly to me. And I wanted to understand exactly what someone would need to access or redirect my assets if something happened to me. Preethi asked if everything was okay. I said I wasn't sure yet. She walked me through everything clearly and without judgment. A beneficiary change on a life insurance policy requires a form signed by the policyholder. A power of attorney, if one existed, could theoretically authorize financial decisions. But I didn't have one in place, and creating one requires the policyholder to be alive and consenting. She told me that if anything ever seemed suspicious, I should contact both my insurer and the relevant financial institution directly. Then I called my insurance company and verified that no changes had been made to my policy and that any future change requests would require a callback to my cell number. Then I called a lawyer. His name is Mr. Ibarra, and he works out of a small office on King Street that smells like old coffee and seems to operate mostly on referrals. A friend from the hospital had used him for an estate matter and said he was methodical and calm and did not overcharge. All 3 things turned out to be true. I told him what I'd found. I told him what I suspected. I told him I didn't have proof yet, just a piece of paper and a very bad feeling. He leaned back and looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Let's make sure that if he tries anything, he does it where we can see him." For the next 3 weeks, I acted completely normal. I texted Grant about a hockey game. I asked him how his son was doing. I mentioned, casually, in a way I practiced twice before sending, that I'd been feeling run down lately and had gone to see my GP about some fatigue. I didn't elaborate. I just let it sit there. He wrote back almost immediately, asked what the doctor said he'd been worried about me too. I said I was probably just overworked, that the doctor wanted to run some tests, that I'd let him know. He sent a heart emoji. I put my phone down and stared at my ceiling for a long time. Mr. Ibarra had a contact, a woman who worked in financial fraud investigation. I'll call her the investigator because she asked that I not use her name. She was quiet, thorough, and had the kind of flat affect that I associate with people who've seen too much and decided the most useful response is no response at all. Over 2 weeks, with my explicit cooperation, she traced what Grant had been doing. He had called my insurance company twice in the past month using a number that wasn't mine. Spoofed, she explained. Which I had to have explained to me twice. He'd gotten far enough to learn what was required to change a beneficiary, but hadn't been able to complete the process without my verbal confirmation. He'd also contacted a financial institution I had a GIC with, pretending to be calling on my behalf, and had asked general questions about what would happen to a non-registered account if the holder passed away without a named beneficiary. The institution had given him general information and loves the call as unusual. He hadn't succeeded at anything. yet. But he was preparing. He was mapping out what he could get to and how. And the word the investigator used, and I have never forgotten it, was staged. She said it looked like someone staging access, getting ready, waiting for the right moment. I thought about my condo. I thought about the key I'd given him years ago for emergencies. I changed my locks that weekend. Here is the part I find hardest to talk about. I am a nurse. I work in a ward where I have held the hands of people whose families love them and people whose families are waiting in the hallway calculating what they're worth. I know the difference. I have seen it with my own eyes. And still, some part of me spent those 3 weeks thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe Grant was just going through something terrible and acting badly without fully knowing what he was doing. I talked to my best friend about it one night over the phone. She listened to everything and then said, very gently, that she thought I was giving him more benefit of the doubt than he'd earned. She was right. What finally settled it for me was something small. I was at my parents' place for Sunday dinner, and my mum mentioned offhandedly that Grant had been asking her questions about Grant's estate, specifically about whether the Burlington house proceeds had all gone to me, or whether there was anything in trust she might not know about. My mum thought it was just him trying to understand the family finances. She wasn't worried. I excused myself and went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at my reflection for a full minute. He was working every angle. Mr. Ibarra and I had been building something quietly. It wasn't dramatic. It was paperwork and documentation and phone logs and a careful, boring accumulation of evidence that I was starting to think might not add up to anything actionable. The investigator had found patterns, but not crimes. Questions asked, not actions taken. Then Grant asked me to lunch. We met at a place we'd been going to since we were kids, a diner in the East End that has the same booths it's had for 30 years. He was already there when I arrived. He looked tired, older than I'd been thinking of him. There was something off about his energy, a kind of forced lightness that I recognized from watching patients' families when they're about to ask a doctor for something they know is unreasonable. He ordered coffee. He talked about his son for a while. Then he told me he was in trouble. Real trouble, he said. The kind you don't talk about at Sunday dinner. He told me about the loan. Not everything, not the full number, but enough. He told me about the interest. He told me the person he owed money to was not patient. He told me he didn't know what was going to happen if he didn't get help soon. And then he looked at me across the table and he said, "You're the only person I can come to." I looked back at him. I felt something close up in my chest, not cruelty, not satisfaction, but a kind of terrible clarity. The kind that comes when you finally understand that someone you love has been calculating your value for a long time, and only came to you when the numbers got desperate. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded. He said, "Of course." He looked relieved again. He shouldn't have looked relieved. I called Mr. Ibarra from my car. He had advised me to get Grant to say as much as possible in writing. Over the next week, I did exactly that. I sent careful, neutral text messages that kept the conversation going. How much do you need? What's the timeline? Is there any flexibility on their end? Grant responded in detail. He told me the amount, which was more than I'd expected. He told me the deadline. He used the word urgent 6 times in one message. He said he was scared. I saved every message. Then I did something that Mr. Ibarra had suggested, and I had initially resisted. I asked Grant to meet me at my financial institution, a large branch near my office, because I said I wanted to talk to my advisor together before I made any decisions. I told him it would make me more comfortable to have everything documented. He said yes immediately. He didn't hesitate for a single second. We set a date. What Grant didn't know, what I hadn't told him, was that I had spoken to my branch manager the day before. I had explained the situation. I had shown her the text messages. I had asked whether it would be possible, if something unusual happened during our meeting, for there to be someone senior present. She was very professional and very serious, and she said she would make sure the right people were available. I also did one other thing, something that felt almost cinematic, but that Mr. Ibarra had suggested and that I had decided was the right move. 2 days before the meeting, I told Grant, again, by text, that I had been having some chest pain and that my doctor had put me on a new medication and that I was a little worried. I didn't say anything more than that. I just said I was a little worried. He wrote back, "Oh no, please take care of yourself, you're all I've got." I read that message 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the counter and finished making dinner. The day of the meeting, I got to the branch early. Grant arrived 8 minutes late, which was normal for him. He looked better than he had at the diner. He'd shaved. He was wearing the jacket he wore when he wanted to seem responsible. He greeted the advisor warmly, the way people do when they're trying to make a good impression on someone they assume has power over something they want. We sat down. The advisor explained what kinds of transfers and account actions we could discuss. Grant nodded along. He had a notepad. I noticed he'd already written some things on it before he arrived. Then his phone rang. He glanced at it, then at me, and said, "Sorry, I have to take this, 1 minute," and stepped out into the corridor. I sat with my advisor. We didn't say anything. We could hear, faintly, Grant's voice through the glass partition. "Yes," he said. "I'm at the bank right now. I'm with her." A pause. "No, she doesn't know." Another pause. "If this works today, yeah, I'll have it by Friday." He came back in, put his phone away, and smiled at us like nothing had happened. My advisor looked at him, and she looked at me. Then she reached forward and pressed a small button under the edge of her desk. The branch manager came in 30 seconds later. With her was a man she introduced as their financial crimes liaison, and behind him, in the doorway, were 2 officers from Hamilton Police who had been waiting in the back office since before I'd arrived. I watched Grant's face. I don't have words for what happened to it. It was like watching a building lose its structure. Everything holding it up just gave way at once. "Is she finally gone?" one of the officers said, reading from his notes. Quoting, "I realized what Grant had said on the phone." The conversation had been flagged by the branch's fraud monitoring system the moment he said she doesn't know. Grant turned to me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Power of attorney. He'd been looking into it, but he'd never completed one. And you can't set up a POA over a living, conscious person without their knowledge and consent. Not in Ontario. Not anywhere in Canada. He'd also looked into whether he could have himself named as my beneficiary by presenting himself as my authorized representative, which is not a thing that exists. Every angle he'd been working was built on a foundation of things that aren't actually how any of this works, and that fact, more than anything, is what I keep coming back to. He didn't know what he was doing. He knew I had money. He knew he needed it. He knew I loved him. He just started pulling on threads and hoping something would come loose. It didn't. Grant was charged with attempted fraud and criminal breach of trust. He was released on conditions that included no contact with me and no access to my financial information. His lawyer negotiated a plea that I was not part of. I'd given my statement and handed over everything, and after that, it was between him and the system he'd been trying to use against me. My parents found out. That was the hardest part, not the charges, not the investigation, not even the day at the bank. It was sitting across from my mother at her kitchen table and watching her try to hold 2 things at once, that she loved her son and that her son had been planning to profit from her daughter's death. She didn't do it in front of me, but I know she cried for a long time. My dad called me once, very late at night, about 2 weeks after everything came out. He didn't say much. He just said, "You did right, and I'm sorry you had to." That's the closest he's ever come to telling me he was proud of me. I'll take it. I still live in my condo. I still work at the hospital. I still have Preeti looking after my accounts, and I have her on speed dial in a way I didn't before. My locks are different. My passwords are different. My emergency contact at work is no longer my brother. I have not spoken to Grant since the day at the bank. His lawyer sent a letter, forwarded through Mr. Ibarra, that contained something that was supposed to be an apology. It was written in the careful, responsibility-adjacent language of someone who was told by their counsel to express remorse. It did not move me. People ask me sometimes, my friends, my colleagues, a cousin who heard about it through the family grapevine, if I feel guilty, if I wonder whether I went too far, if turning your brother over to the police is something you can come back from. Here's what I tell them. I spent weeks giving him chances he didn't know I was giving him. I sat across from him at the diner and listened to him tell me I was the only person he could come to, and I let him believe, for a little while longer, that he might get what he was after. I did that not to be cruel, but because I needed to be sure. I needed to know with the same certainty I would bring to any other serious decision in my life that what I believed was actually true. It was. You don't set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. You don't drain your own savings, your own future, your own security to cover the damage someone else has been quietly causing for years. And when someone you love has actually decided in a calculated way that your death is a solution to their problem, the love you feel for them is not a reason to do nothing. It's the reason you make sure it never happens. I'm okay. That's the thing I want people to hear most. I'm okay. My money is where I put it. My name is on my own accounts. My doors lock, and only I have the key. And every morning I drive to work and do something that actually matters, and I come home, and I make dinner, and I sit in my own space that I built with my own effort. And that's enough. That has always been enough. It just took someone trying to take it from me to make me understand how much it was worth protecting. There's a moment I keep coming back to, not the day at the bank, not the police in the doorway, but the night I sat alone at my kitchen table with a pencil and a blank sheet of paper and pressed lightly until my brother's handwriting appeared. That moment, that's the one that changed something in me permanently. Because I could have stopped there. I could have called him, told him what I found, given him a chance to explain. Part of me wanted to. That part is real and I'm not ashamed of it. He was my brother and I loved him, and love doesn't disappear just because someone does something unforgivable. But I've learned that love and trust are not the same thing, and conflating them is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make. What Grant did wasn't impulsive. He didn't stumble into my filing cabinet in a moment of weakness. He researched. He called institutions. He mapped timelines. He showed up at that bank with a notepad full of prepared questions. That kind of planning requires something deliberate, a choice, made repeatedly over weeks, and every single time he made that choice, I was on the other side of it, not as his sister, as a problem to be solved. I think about the version of me that doesn't check the filing cabinet carefully enough. The version that takes his word for it and goes to bed. That version loses everything, not because she was naive, but because she was decent, and someone used her decency against her. There's a real grief in that. I felt it, and I still feel it sometimes. But here's what I also know now. Being a decent person doesn't mean being an unprotected one. Doing right by people doesn't require you to leave every door unlocked. Kindness is not the same as carelessness. And being the kind of person who trusts your family is not a character flaw, unless you let it become a strategy that works against you. What got me through wasn't luck. It was paying attention. It was taking that bad feeling seriously instead of talking myself out of it. It was making one call to Preethi, and then one call to Mr. Abara, and then sitting with the discomfort of building a case against someone I shared a childhood with. That took something, not just courage, but the willingness to think clearly when everything in me wanted to believe I was wrong. And I want to say something to anyone watching who's in the middle of their own version of this. Maybe it's not a brother. Maybe it's a parent, a partner, a friend. Maybe you have that same bad feeling and you keep dismissing it because the alternative, that someone you love sees you as a resource, is too painful to look at directly. Look at it anyway. You are allowed to protect yourself. You are allowed to ask questions, document things, change your locks, call a lawyer. Doing those things doesn't make you cold. It makes you someone who takes their own life seriously, and the people who genuinely love you will never punish you for that. Grant made his choices, and those choices had consequences. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because actions leave traces, and I was paying attention. That's all it was. Attention, and the willingness to act on what I saw. I'm still here. My accounts are still mine. And every morning I drive to work and do something useful for people who actually need me. And I come home to a life I built, and I don't owe anyone an apology for protecting it.